Today's session on brain tumour and cancer, childhood cancer research. The Petitions Committee has a proud history of working with brain tumour research, including a major report in 2016, and the committee last took evidence on this topic in early 2019. So we're holding this session to assess what progress has been made since then, as well as to follow up on more recent petitions and on funding for research into childhood cancers, which was debated in Westminster Hall in December last year. So we're really pleased that two campaigners whose families have been directly affected by brain tumours, as well as research funders, scientific researchers, and the relevant minister and government officials are able to speak to us today. So before I start, could I ask our two panel members to just briefly introduce yourselves? Do you want to go first, Peter?
Yes, I'm Peter Realf, and my daughter Maria launched the original petition in 2016, which was signed by 120,000 people. And she was very surprised at the time to find that just 1.37% of all funding into cancer went into research for brain tumours, particularly when she also discovered that it was the biggest cancer killer of children and under 40s.
Thank you. And Fiona?
I'm Fiona Govan. I'm Logan's grandmother, who, after my then 2-year-old grandson was diagnosed and died within the year of that, like Peter, I learned at that stage only that less than 2% of research funding into cancer is allocated to children's, and that's all of them combined. So I started 2 petitions that didn't get to the right mark and one that did. So thank you for having me here, and thank you to all the people who signed.
Well, thank you for being here. I was going to ask why this issue means so much to you, but it's fairly obvious from the introductions that you've made why you're campaigning on this issue and why it means very much so much to you. So, I mean, I don't know if you've got anything to add. Yeah, would you like to come in, Peter?
Just to say really that I am grateful for the Petitions Committee who have, actually addressed this first of all in 2015 and who haven't let it slide and go on the back burner. And it's a real credit to the committee that they've actually continued to follow this through.
Thank you, I appreciate that. But I have to say it's a real credit to the petitioners and the campaigners on this issue as well. So I'll go to you, Tonya. Have you got some questions you'd like to ask?
I have, thank you, Chair. And before I start my questions, I'd just like to say that I am the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Cancer. Hello, Fiona, it's nice to see you again. And I also led your petition back in 2019 as well. But you've started 2 petitions now on childhood cancer research, including one that was debated and led by myself in December. Were you satisfied with the response the Minister gave in the debate, Fiona?
In one word, no. Both in the debate and in the course of the written response, there was lots of references to things like the Tessa Gel Brain Cancer Mission, to Brain Matrix, to National Institute for Health Research. And as far as I'm aware, the Tessa Gel Brain Cancer Mission and Brain Matrix do no work in childhood cancers at this time and haven't to date. So I think it was wrong to refer to that. And in terms of the National Institute of Health Research, the way they classify their data does not separate between adult and childhood cancers. So referring to childhood to brain cancer, funding, including childhood cancer and DIPG, I'm sorry, I just don't think there's any evidence to support that, and I'm not aware of any direct research into DIPG. So I think all those issues concerned me. I was wholly moved by so many of the speeches by the MPs, so many really good ideas, and a significant number of those weren't even addressed in the government's response.
And you've spoken about the the difference with the research doesn't separate between childhood cancer and adult, brain tumours. And your petition called for ring-fencing funding for research into DIPG and other childhood cancers. Why do you feel this is so important? I know why it's important to you, and we spoke about it in the debate, but is there anything else you want to add?
It's an orphan disease. There is no mechanism at present to factor in the years of life lost. These are small people who don't get to grow up. I mean, I think the words of my own MP, Patricia Gibson, were just so on point that, excuse me if I'm referring to notes, I mean, she made the point that this, of course I can't find it. No, I mean, she was making the point that this is a life unlived. This is not right. This isn't the normal order of things. I lost both my parents to cancer. My dad was in his mid-80s, my mum in her mid-70s. And it's sad, but it's not tragic. Logan was 3. He didn't get to start school. He didn't get to grow up. He didn't get to meet a girlfriend or a boyfriend. He didn't get to have children. And that's because this is ignored. There isn't a mechanism, so the funding goes towards the bigger cancers, the ones with more support in their awareness raising. I mean, you'll usually see MPs and other public figures, BBC and all these kind of places, sporting pink ribbons for breast cancer awareness. You almost never ever see childhood cancer awareness ribbons in September. And because of that, Logan got the same treatment in 2016 that Neil Armstrong's daughter got in 1962. That is how absolutely not the dial has moved for these children. And I just feel it's so important that changes, and it has to come from government. At the moment, we're relying on small charities like Abby's Army to fund this research. And that was what came behind the petition. I could I couldn't run marathons. I could walk marathons to try and raise funds, but that's never going to be the same amount of money that a government is in the position to do if it cares about young people's cancers.
Fiona, I mean, the government, stated that there are recent initiatives on brain tumour research. Do you think they will benefit DIPG and other childhood brain cancers? Are you hopeful?
I think there are, I've yet to see any clear evidence that it will benefit childhood cancers or DIPG specifically. As I say, I go back to the issue of transparency. It's simply impossible to tell from the figures. I acquired the National Cancer Research Institute funding analysis, childhood, adolescent and young adult cancer. And again, where there's that issue of the transparency between adult and child spending, the NCIR report lumps in government funding with charity funding. So while you can't tell what age, whether it's an adult or a childhood cancer, you equally can't tell if any of that is coming from the government funding directly. So, and then I'm sure Peter will have words to say on this. From his family's petition, there came the Tessa Brain Cancer Mission, and of the 40 million research funding that was committed to that, I understand less than a quarter has been spent 3.5 years later. So no, I don't have a huge amount of confidence. I wish I could.
Thank you, Fiona. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Elliot, did you want to come in and ask some questions? And I know, Peter, you might have something to add on what Fiona said, but I'm sure Elliot will ask you something and you'll be able to add it into that.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, indeed, Peter, I'd like to turn to you next, if that's okay. You gave evidence back to this committee in 2016, and subsequently you were appointed as a member of the Government Working Group on Brain Tumours, which reported in 2018.
Yes.
What progress do you feel has been made since that report was handed over in 2018?
I think there has been some progress made, and I think that's encouraging. But I think what struck me in reading the document that was produced by Petitions in 2016 is how much of it largely seems untouched. So many recommendations there that don't seem at this point to have been addressed. In terms of the funding, I've made 2 Freedom of Information requests, and I've also asked the question through my MP as to what funding has been achieved, how much has been spent. And I find it very difficult to get an actual answer because all 3 of those documents vary, and they vary by quite substantial amounts. I think there's also something else coming out, which is about spend versus allocated fundings. So there may be funding that's allocated, but has it actually been spent yet on research? And in some of the issues that I've looked at, it doesn't appear that it has. So
Thank you.
I'm disappointed that we are not much further on than we were 5 years ago. And the one thing I would say is for brain tumour patients, the one thing they don't have is time. And with 88% of brain tumour patients dying within 5 years, they don't have time for us to talk about it for a long period. We need to get on with this, and we need to fund some of the research.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's incredibly helpful. And you've touched on the fact that there's still quite a lot of those reports recommendations which haven't really changed over the last few years. What of those recommendations or of those conclusions do you think are most in need of being addressed today? You've mentioned funding, but is there anything else that you feel out of those recommendations that is most urgent to be addressed?
Yes, I think there are issues about diagnosis. The Petitions Committee report highlighted quite clearly how often patients go back to their GPs time and time again and fail to get a diagnosis, and what a large proportion of patients actually end up, over half, I gather, end up in A&E having had a seizure, and that's when they're diagnosed. Having said that, unless we invest in research and come up with some solutions to the issue, and some cure at some point, by diagnosing earlier, as my daughter said in her original documents, it just meant patients had a longer walk to the grave, and that simply isn't good enough.
No, thank you for that, Peter. And finally, both to Peter and Fiona, and Peter, if I come to you first. Obviously, ministers are on the call and would have heard what you've both said, and officials from the Department of Health would have heard as well. But when we begin our questioning later in this afternoon session, what one message or question do you want us to put to them? What's the most important thing you want us to take away from your evidence today? Peter, if I start with you. Oh, you're on mute, Peter.
I got it, yeah. I would earnestly ask the minister, to champion the cause of brain tumour patients, and to really take this on board. Look at the shocking statistics, and both Fiona and I'm sure, can give you plenty of those, and basically look at the statistics and champion this in government, because Maria's original petition in 2015, which was actually launched to mark the first anniversary of my son's death, was to increase funding, to give parity of funding with other cancers. So we were calling at that time for 30 to 35 million. Now, if you look at the 40 million over 5 years, That's nowhere near what the petition was asking for. It's nowhere near what those 120,000 people were asking for when they signed the petition. So we need to get parity of funding, and that needs to happen urgently.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for your evidence. And Fiona, if I can come to you with the same question, what one message or questions you want us to put to ministers later on in this session?
This comes actually from another parent, and I think it's spot on. When will the government replace meaningless words with a viable action plan for funding research into childhood cancers with the lowest survival rate, which is specific, how much and how will it be allocated, measurable, give us transparent data, and realistic and properly targeted, so then perhaps in 10 years' time, Logan wouldn't have needed to die.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you both for your evidence, and I'm going to hand back to the chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Elliot, and thank you, Peter and Fiona. It's been quite short, your session with us as a panel, but incredibly powerful in that short time. So, I mean, I don't know if you've got any final comments that you want to make before we go to the next panel, and we take evidence on this issue, and then obviously put the matters to the government as well. Peter?
If I could, I would just like to say that in 2008, when my son was diagnosed with a brain tumour, we knew very little about brain tumours, probably like a lot of other parents, and his outlook was absolutely hopeless. And research gave him some hope. He hoped things would change. He hoped there'd be a way to stop the tumour or delay the tumour's growth. And that was the one thing that was giving him some hope. You know, sadly that didn't happen, and he died in 2015. But my hope for other families finding themselves in a similar situation lives on through research, and we need to do this research. The Petitions Committee said in their report, successive governments have failed brain tumour patients and their families for decades. The government must now put this right, and that is very true.
Thank you, Peter. And Fiona, did you have something you wanted to add?
I suppose it would be more than anything to look to other countries that are doing what we're asking our government to do. The clear example is the Australian government in its Medical Research Futures Fund. It has allocated specific money. It is looking to provide grants specifically for these childhood cancers. Then I understand no hope, because so many families newly diagnosed, you make your choice. Are we going to try and scour the world to find a trial that might give us a few more months or the hope of a cure? Or do we do as the hospital tell us to and take our children home to make memories, because they will die within a year? That can't be right. That cannot be right in today's society, when you can spend, 12 billion on a vaccine for COVID, but you can't find a fraction of that so that children can grow up.
Thank you, Fiona. Thanks very much, both of you, Fiona and Peter. Incredibly powerful evidence that you've given today. So we're now going to move on to our second panel, and I'll just ask them to put their cameras on and briefly introduce yourselves as well. So I'll start, if it's all right with you, I'll start with you, Sue. If you want to just briefly introduce yourself and tell us about your interest and work in brain tumours and childhood cancers.
Hi, so yeah, I'm Sue Farrington-Smith. I'm co-founder and chief executive of Brain Tumour Research. I have a passion for finding a cure for brain tumours, having lost my sister's little girl, Alison Phelan, to a brain tumour 20 years ago, 3 weeks before her 8th birthday. And having met so many devastated families since, we've really got to do something now so that in the next 20 years, we haven't got the same story.
Thank you, Sue. Ian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Ian Walker. I'm Executive Director for Policy, Information and Communications at Cancer Research UK. Excuse me. So I guess as people will be aware, CRUK is the largest medical research charity dedicated to saving lives through research. And our interest here is that in 2014, through our strategic review, we highlighted 4 cancers of unmet need, one of which was brain cancer. And these are really cancers that had booked the trend, I guess, of progress in therapeutic advances, and brain cancer in particular, as we've heard very eloquently from Fiona and Peter. We really haven't seen any substantial progress in terms of therapeutic options for those patients in the last 40 years. So at that time, since 2014, we've approximately tripled our spend in terms of the amount of money that we've allocated to research in brain cancer. And since 2018, when the Task and Finish Group report was published, and we'd committed that we would try and spend £25 million, we have now committed approximately £28 million worth of new research in a ring-fenced, targeted way towards brain cancer. And we can perhaps talk as we go through the questions, if helpful, more specifically about the paediatric components of that.
Thank you. Professor Gilbertson?
Hi, yes, Catherine, thank you. My name is Richard. So I chair the Department of Oncology at the University of Cambridge. I also direct the CRUK Major Centre at Cambridge and the Children's Brain Tumour Centre of Excellence at Cambridge. I'm a children's cancer doctor by training, actually children's brain tumour specialist, and for the last 30 years, my research is focused on developing understandings of children's brain tumours and new treatments for that disease. I spent 15 years in the States, where I was the director of the US's largest children's cancer research hospital, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, as a scientific director there before coming back in 2015 to the UK. And I also chair the Tessa Jow Brain Cancer Mission, which we've already talked a little bit about today. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on any of those aspects.
Okay, thank you. And then Professor Jones.
Hi, thank you, Catherine. So my name is Chris Jones. I'm a basic scientist, cancer biologist, based at the Institute of Cancer Research in London, down our Sutton campus. My lab is focused on the biology of childhood brain tumours, like Richard. Particularly, we focus on a group of tumours called high-grade glioma in children and young adults. And these include, and we have a particular interest in DIPG, which you've already heard some powerful testimony about. And I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion, particularly just a few days after DIPG Awareness Day, where we heard so many moving stories from families who lost their child to DIPG.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. We do very much appreciate it. I was just going to come back to you, first of all, Sue, if that's okay. You've been involved with both the Government Working Group on Brain Tumours in 2018 and now the Tessa Jow Brain Cancer Mission. Is there more momentum behind brain tumour research today than there has been previously, in your view?
Yeah, it's definitely moving forward, and I think the patient, the Centres of Excellence for Patient Care will really benefit brain tumour patients going forward. But I guess, and I know Richard knows this, for me, we can give all the care in the world, but we've absolutely got to do something about funding research to find the cure, because these families, that's what they want to hear. They don't want to hear there are no treatment options. So, and we still are in that position. There are no treatment options.
Have you seen improvements in the UK brain tumour research? Particularly, have you seen improvements that could be attributed to the work of the Government Working Group or the Tessa Jow mission? Where have you seen improvements, if you have, and where could you attribute them to? I
know there's an increased investment. Obviously, Ian talked about the increased investment in Cancer Research UK, but it's still small steps, I think, at this stage. I'm not seeing anything that's going to, be life-changing going forward. People still. I guess
what I'm thinking is where can we focus the effort to try and, because there is some momentum now, which you said in the first, you answered the first question. So what is it that could drive the momentum going forward? Like where do we best focus our efforts?
So I think there's been a lot of, obviously, thinking about investment in clinical research, but I'm not so sure we've done the basic research yet. And of course, you know, brain tumour research itself, just, you know, at the moment we can only fund £1 million a year, with there's much bigger budgets around. The government aren't putting the money behind it. So, you know, I think we probably need to look at joined up thinking across the spectrum, you know, and what we need to do, and, you know, a focus group on what is it that's needed to be done to find that cure, and then address it all in a joined up way.
Okay, thank you. Tonya, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. My questions are mainly to Ian for the moment. Cancer Research UK has made significant commitments on brain and childhood cancers in recent years, including the extra 25 million for brain tumour research in 2018. Why have you decided to invest specifically in these areas?
Yes, thank you. So I guess as I mentioned in my introduction, if we take them in order, particularly thinking about brain cancer first, you know, as we've heard, it's a terrible collection of diseases. There are many different types of brain tumours, central nervous system tumours, and intracranial tumours that we kind of capture in that grouping. But if we look across them as a whole, survival for these diseases is pretty poor, and you know, 5-year survival, again, as an average, is typically around 1 in 10, and there are certainly subsets of disease within that where survival is much, much less. We've already heard, when we think about pediatric brain cancers, which are, you know, one of the biggest killers, the biggest killer from disease of children within the UK, that we really just don't have the right therapeutic interventions right now. So I guess for us, in terms of the CRUK investment, we've really focused on trying to address some of the systemic problems that Sue's beginning to speak to in her response. So, you know, really trying to focus on what the fundamental biological problems are that we need to address, thinking how we build and grow capacity within the research community, and you know, with that bring diversity of thinking, so different multidisciplinary thinking to the problem, so that we really can try and drive an innovative step forward as opposed to incremental progress. So for CRUK, we've had specific highlight calls around these kind of innovative biological questions, multidisciplinary awards, where we spent something like £17.8 million, I think it is, across 3 of our innovation awards, and we've partnered that with the Brain Tumour Research Charity as well. So those are 3 specific programs of research looking at novel ways of treating cancer, but also some of the biological questions and how we even evolve some of the models to help us think more effectively. We've also invested in terms of centres of excellence, which is, I guess, has multiple kind of elements to it. So this is thinking about how we create an environment which is conducive to positive treatment, to positive training rather, of the next generation of researchers, how we bring our clinician scientists through in an environment that's enriched and really focused on specific areas of brain cancer. And so, you know, I guess we've taken a longer term kind of strategic view of how we make our investment, but I think it's really important to also acknowledge, you know, I would view this as a pipeline of innovation, and you know, the funding, the clinical trial funding aspect of this is also important. We have to have opportunities for people to enter clinical trials, you know, as we're finding novel therapies as well. So I really do think the kind of NIHR world is synergistic with ours. It's a really complex system, and you know, everyone has a place, a part to play in this system in terms of how we kind of continue to make progress.
This novel and kind of discovery research that you're doing, it's going on understanding brain tumours. This include brain tumours in children?
I'm just checking down through my notes now, and I might have to come back to you specifically. I think what I can tell you the headline of what they are, but whether it has specific relevance to children, Richard may be able to comment.
Yeah,
actually,
Richard was nodding.
One of the awards is his, actually. So I think the 3 kind of headline areas, one is about how we develop novel drug combination approaches and how we use nanotechnologies to think about more effective ways of delivering novel therapies into the brain, so how it gets across the blood-brain barrier. So again, this is a fairly unique circumstance, if you like, within the body that we have to think differently about how we address. I won't speak to Richard's project, he's much better placed to do that, but the 3rd project is then really about thinking about biological vulnerabilities that are very specific to glioblastoma and some of those cells that essentially they become dormant, which makes them much more resistant to therapies. so thinking about how we might target those mechanisms. But if you'll allow me, perhaps I'll hand over to Richard to speak about his project.
That's great. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, no problem. Very briefly. So, yes, the CIK founded a Centre of Excellence for Children's Brain Tumours based in Cambridge, which I oversee, and that's specifically directed at developing completely new treatments for children's brain tumours, and that's done in partnership with the ICR. And Chris, actually, on the call, is one of the members of that, based at the ICR. And so rather than the typical way drug development is done for children, which is wait for the crumbs to fall off the table of adult cancer and see if we can try that in children, we're actually developing treatments which are specifically for children's brain tumours. And then in concert with that, we've assembled a team of international experts across mainland Europe and North America who are focusing on the basic biology of children's brain tumours with the specific intent of finding vulnerabilities that are unique to children's brain tumours. Because kids' brain tumours, like all cancers in children, are biologically very distinct from those that occur in adults. So it's incredibly important that we focus on the biology of children's cancer rather than try and extrapolate observations from adults into children, which rarely works.
Well, that leads me nicely on to my questions for Chris, actually. So thanks, Richard. Chris, so, much of your research focuses specifically on DIPG. Can you tell us why this disease is still so hard to treat and what your experience of seeking further funding for your research is in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So there are several really fundamental challenges with trying to treat DIPG, if I can go through some of them. So the first is that it occurs in the brain stem. So this is an area of the brain which controls many critical functions such as breathing, swallowing, mobility, and so on. These tumours don't form a distinct lump. They're very sort of invasive, and thus surgery in this region of the brain is just not possible. So this means that you can't just take it out as a treatment option. And it's also had the impact historically of there being no tissue to study. So really, until relatively recently, we had no idea what this tumour really was. I mentioned that it's diffusely infiltrating, so it spreads throughout the brain stem, but also other parts of the brain as well. And studies from post-mortem tissue of children who've passed from this disease have shown that actually it's sort of everywhere throughout the central nervous system at the time that they die. And our own work in this area has actually tried to reconstruct the evolution of these tumours, which suggests that actually some of these cells have already spread outside the brainstem when the child is diagnosed. Biologically, it's a very complex tumour, so it's made up of multiple different subtypes or subclones of tumour cell, which allow it to evade treatment and to rapidly develop resistance to the therapies that we're trying. It's also now apparent that these tumour cells interact with the normal brain cells to grow and spread and to probably suppress an immune response as well. Its biology is unique. As Richard said, these are not just the same as similar looking tumours in adults. And in fact, with DIPG, really it has a genetic makeup which is unlike any other form of human cancer. So as Richard said, for decades, we were trying clinical trials based upon ideas from adult tumours, which didn't work then, and unsurprisingly didn't work in DIPG. The only thing that's really effective at all is radiotherapy, which essentially provides a temporary palliative response at best, and has increasing risk the more you use it of damaging the brainstem. And then finally, it's already been mentioned once or twice, it sits behind what we think is a very intact blood-brain barrier. So this is the border of blood vessel cells which limit chemicals getting into the brain as a protective mechanism, but also stops potentially effective drugs getting in as well. And so as part of the Centre of Excellence, it's designing drugs which can more readily cross the blood-brain barrier, and other sort of innovative drug delivery techniques will be required as well.
Thanks, Chris. Are there any changes you'd like to see to how research funders like NIHR allocate their funding and that you think could help to promote research into DIPG and other cancers with poor survival outcomes?
So the one thing that's been mentioned already is that the NIHR funds primarily clinical research, and there's still a real gap in funding for the sort of basic biological research, which then forms the platform on which we build these translational efforts and getting things into trial. And so I'm not really aware of huge amounts of research spend in this area via the MRC, for example. You asked, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, how do you, how can we plug this gap? How can we address it?
So at several levels, really, we've already heard about outstanding initiatives such as the Centres of Excellence, which are obviously fully support and a really good way of accumulating expertise in a single centre or in a virtual network. I think we need to, it'll probably come up later, promote the careers of young outstanding scientists who may be attracted into this area through all levels of their career progression, from training them as PhD students, not just clinicians being trained, but also basic scientists as well, providing a route through their postdoctoral studies through the outstanding labs we have in the UK, and then having a pathway to them being able to establish their own labs, either within these centres of excellence or elsewhere in the UK. And that's the other point as well, is that the centres of excellence perform an outstanding job and will continue to do so in the long term. There are also some very, very good research pockets around the country, particularly people who have not necessarily been studying DIPG previously, as an example. In the last few years, I've had really a substantial uptick in people approaching me from outside the field, wanting to get involved, wanting to apply their kind of ideas, and just looking for those connections, looking for that advice, model systems, data, which might facilitate them entering into DIPG research. I think that needs to be supported more readily as well.
Thanks very much, Richard. Well, I can see they want to come in. Is that okay, Chair? Okay, Richard and then Ian.
Yeah, very, very briefly. So I completely agree with what Chris has just said. And the real problem with DIPG, with many of the difficult to treat brain tumours, is that they're intrinsically horrible diseases. And that seems like a vague and rather odd statement to say. But if we look at the history of medicine, any problem like this has been solved by disruptive science. That's people outside the field coming up with an idea. It's not the continued sort of important ongoing research that happens in other centres. So there's a very clear possibility here, and that is pressure on UKRI or the funders like Wellcome or MRC to actually engage with what we have in the UK as a fantastic opportunity. We have arguably the world's best neuroscience community here. So one thing the Tessa Gel Brain Cancer Mission has done is worked closely with some of those leading neuroscientists who work on dementia, who work on motor neuron disease, who work on multiple sclerosis, who work on how the brain is fundamentally knitted together, and say to them, if you had the opportunity to have a PhD student or a postdoc who worked in brain tumours in your lab, would you take that chance? And they said, absolutely. They don't need to do this. They don't need to pivot their research. They're already world leaders in their field. But if relatively modest amounts of funding was available to put PhD students and postdocs in those labs, that could be transformative because we would access that expertise. And the reason for setting up the Tessa Gel centres, which we might get to talk about, is you'll have allied NHS institutions treating those patients right next door to those academic health science centres that are doing that kind of research. So we have a real opportunity in the country to transform the landscape with relatively modest and focused investment.
Thank you, Richard. And Ian?
And I mean, just to say, I 100% agree with what Chris and Richard have just said. That's absolutely right. And I think the other point I was going to make is we had felt it was pretty important also to have specific ring-fenced money for target areas. And I think when we're thinking about these kind of small research communities and kind of, there are an inherent disadvantage in a fully open core because they don't necessarily have the long-term sustainable funding behind them that breast cancer would or bowel cancer would, for example. And what that means is that they don't have the tools, they don't have the models, they don't necessarily have, all the tools in the toolkit that mean that they can effectively compete in a fully open system. So, you can still honour the principles of independent peer review and quality by having a ring-fenced and targeted funding allocation for areas that you really want to prioritise your efforts around. And I think, we've found that an important part of our model from a CRUK perspective in terms of where we've increased our spend in these areas.
Thanks, Ian. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Tonya. Elliot, do you want to come in and ask some questions now?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our second panel for coming along. Particularly great to see Chris from the ICR here. The ICR is in my borough in Sutton in South London, so I can highly recommend it to colleagues for a visit if they're ever in my part of the world. Richard, if I could start with you and ask, the Tessa Gel Brain Cancer Mission describes itself as a convening body. Could you explain a little bit more about how that actually works in practice, and in particular what your relationship with government is like? Yeah,
thank you. In fact, thanks to the sort of legacy of Tessa, we have a very good relationship with government, I think, and that's been transformative. So it's a convening body because My experience in the States and here is that often we have all the right pieces for the jigsaw. They just often never talk to each other or work together effectively. And so basically what we've done is bring together the key stakeholders like charities represented on the call here, the clinical arena, and also the academic research arena together, along with patients and families, to focus on the issue of brain tumours and really target what are the key issues that we need to address. And in doing that, we've actually, in a very short time, 3 years, identified basically the 5 key areas, which are in training, in clinical trials, in research, in patient outreach, but also in the NHS care system. So in the last year, what we've done is run actually the world's most intense and detailed landscape view of brain tumour research and treatment in any country. We engaged all 26 of the UK's NHS centres treating brain tumours. 20 of those applied to be centres of excellence, and 9 of them have been launched as centres of excellence. What that's done is given us a granular view of what does excellence look like. That's a key starting point for understanding where the capacity needs are. And then, as I've mentioned, we're bringing alongside the research elements into that so that people who are actually interested, not in brain tumours at the moment, but interested in doing that, can ally with actually clinical activity in those centres. They're also focused for training as well. So basically, we have in this country no neuro-oncologists apart from one. That's a medical oncologist, a cancer physician who focus on brain tumours. In the US, every routine hospital has a neuro-oncologist. So it's a bit bizarre in terms of that gap. So we're starting a training program, which the NIH are going to partner with in terms of fellowships, which is fantastic. We've had great support actually from James O'Shaughnessy previously, and then Lord Bethel's office in bringing this together. And I think also just the goodwill that was created by just the intrinsically good person that Tessa was, and now carried forward by her daughter, Jess Mills, has brought really attention to this across the different political parties and interested in making things better for both children and adults with brain tumours. The last thing I would say is that the previous panel quite rightly pointed out that the mission is focused in its first 3 years on adult cancers. That was very purposeful because that's where the initial drive was. However, our next focus, which will be happening in the next few months, is to open Tessa Giles centres for kids. Basically, that's to launch in those centres in the NHS hospitals, often based in children's hospitals, the same kind of principle. What is excellence like in children's brain tumour care? What does it look like? All the way from treatment through to community care, and then raise all boats by sort of launching that activity. And they provide a nidus for all of the activity around clinical trials, research, community care, patient outreach and training.
Thank you very much, Richard. And really looking to Sue, Ian and Chris now, that convening role that the Tessa Giles Brain Cancer Mission brings, how has that transformed the brain tumour research environment in the UK? What impact have you seen that convening body model have? Sue, if I can start with you.
I think it brings clarity, and a roadmap to what we want, what we need to do. But I think, we often talk about the funders, and of course the funders are the people that are sat around the table that, and are reliant on the British public giving us money in order to fund research. And I know, with Cancer Research UK, yes, they funded the 28 million, but because of what's happened in the last year with COVID, they're saying they may not be able to commit to that, beyond the next 5 years. So it's kind of what's coming down the line. What can we be assured of in terms of finances? I mean, we're incredibly grateful to our supporter base, who kept us going in the last year. I think, the £15 million that was spent on brain tumour research through the NCRI partners, of that 11 million came from Cancer Research UK, 1 million came from ourselves. So the other 3 million, was that from Wellcome or was that from the government? So, we really need to see the government contributing a lot more in the research space for brain tumours.
Thank you very much, Sue. And Ian, if I can come to you next on this question of how having the convening body in the Tessa Giles mission, how has that changed the landscape in the UK? Oh, you're on mute, Ian, sorry.
Thank you. I think I don't have a huge amount to add from what you've heard from Richard and from Sue. I mean, I think there's definitely an important part of this convening aspect and bringing focus and strategic alignment around, where investments are happening. And even just thinking to, Richard's comments about the paediatric centres that will follow over the course of the next few months or year, thinking about how we make sure that those things are really aligned to other paediatric investments, whether that's clinical trial units, our experimental cancer medicine centre network, where we have a paediatric network co-funded with the 4 devolved departments of health, making sure that all of these different pieces of the jigsaw, to use Richard's words, really are stuck together and speaking to each other and aligned in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So from that alignment perspective, I think there's a clear role and a clear advantage in terms of the work that's been done.
Thanks very much, Ian. And finally, Chris, over to you on the same question.
Thank you. Yes, picking up on that a little bit, I guess. I'm really glad to hear that the mission will start focusing on childhood brain tumour centres in the coming months. That's terrific news. As Richard knows, for some of these very rare and complex childhood brain tumours, you need that specialist expertise. And of course, what's happened in the UK because of that rarity is that by necessity, but also by choice, is that we've worked in these international collaboratives for some time. And it'd be really great to understand really how the mission can intersect with some of those large international collaboratives that are running some of these innovative trials right now, but which we are, I guess, struggling to open within the UK. There are several consortia, some of which I'm involved with, such as ITCC, Innovative Therapies for Childhood Cancer. This is a European consortium which opens stratified clinical trials such as the eSMART trial in the UK. And we're developing a specific ITCC brain network to open brain-specific trials, including for DIPG, across these specialist centres in Europe, including the UK. So it'd be great to know how that intersects. But there are others as well, which the UK either is or could be a part of, which have proven really difficult to open these trials. So one I'm involved with is Connect, which is a network of clinical centres, research labs across North America, Europe and Australia, running these early phase trials, including trials for DIPG, but to date they've only been based in the US. Another one is PNOC, or the Pacific Neuro-Oncology Consortium, again primarily based in North America, but also beginning to open studies now in Europe, in Zurich, and elsewhere internationally. So there's plenty of ideas coming through these networks, but as I understand it, there just isn't the capacity to deliver some of these complex international trials through the specialist centres in the UK. This is not my area of expertise, but my colleagues tell me there's simply not enough resource for the clinical trials delivery teams to go through these difficult, practical, regulatory governance issues to open these international trials. I think it'd be really great if something like the mission could actually intersect with some of these and allow us to open some of these trials that are already extant. We haven't got to reinvent them via these networks which we're already a part of, so that families, children in the UK could benefit from this kind of choice of innovative trials as well.
Thanks very much, Chris. And everyone touched on funding there as well. And if I move on to talking about the government's commitment to invest £40 million in brain tumour research over 5 years, we're now 3 years into that commitment. What I'm keen to understand is how much of a difference that has made. Is there a concern that more hasn't been allocated? Have the processes and criteria for this funding have been the right ones? And is there anything that you would like to see done differently or prioritised differently in the remaining 2 years of that commitment? So there's quite a lot to pack into one question there, but I hope you'll forgive me. Sue, if I come to you first on this question of funding.
Well, you know what I'm going to say, that it isn't enough. We have only, I don't know if you've seen our petition report. 112,000 people signed that. And we're not seeing that money. We know only 25% has been spent. It is at the clinical end. Do we need to spend, to get 40 million spent at the clinical end? Do we need 800 million spent at the basic end? We need to sort of understand what is it that we need across the spectrum. And what are the government doing to help, to help move that forward? Because none of us can do it alone. And if Cancer Research UK change their strategy in another 5 years' time, who is going to be left then to keep this going? So we want to see parity with other cancers, and we want to see the government levelling up basically, and really in the same way they did with COVID, let's throw some money behind this and really, you know, obviously in the right way, as has been outlined by the Tessa Brain Cancer Mission, but we've just got to see it moving forward now, or we'll be in the same position 20 years down the line.
Thanks very much, Sue. Chris, if I come to you next on this question of funding.
Yeah, obviously agree that more funding is necessary. As has been mentioned several times, these are complex diseases and they really are going to take a village to try to improve survival for these kids. So we need to be funding at all levels, career levels, all levels in terms of risk and innovation. We talk about some of the out of the box type approaches that are going to be needed to really move the dial. We also need to support just some of the more laborious, painstaking preclinical type work, which is going to be required to take some of those innovative ideas and just do the grunt work to show that they're robust treatments that could then be actually trialed within the pediatric oncology setting as well. And you asked about the sort of government funding specifically. I don't have much to add really than what's already been said, which is primarily this has been apportioned, as I understand it, through the NIHR. And so I think much more needs to be filtered through the UKRI, MRC, and the basic science end of things as well.
Thanks very much, Chris. Richard, can I come to you next?
Yeah, I think the 40 million commitment is a bit disingenuous. So what I mean by that is that, hopefully the Olympics will happen in Japan, they will happen, but it's a bit like saying to somebody who hasn't trained, has been chronically undertrained for years, yep, you can join the race at the start, but they've got no hope of winning. And that's basically the brain tumour community. It's been chronically underfunded, under-resourced for many years. And as a consequence, what the NIHR does, it says, yes, you're eligible to apply for this money, but there's an underfunded, under-resourced, arena that has little capacity to respond to this. Now, what the mission has done is bring together those individuals so that we have a fantastic opportunity now in a landscape ready and poised for that. But the government has to invest smartly. We get that. We also understand that everybody cries for money and says, our cause is important. But we have a fantastic opportunity in this country in its basic neuroscience community. It is world class. So actually you have an opportunity to direct money specifically to the neuroscience community to work on brain tumours. The one thing that has to happen is this can't be an open call for all diseases or even all cancers. There needs to be a ring-fenced amount of money for brain tumours, but invested smartly in the UK's neuroscience community. If you put those two elements together, it would be highly potent and transformative, and that's what needs to be done. So a simple open call by the NIHR to say, you can apply for this is unhelpful. If it goes to the neuroscience community, which is superb, but for brain tumour research, it'll be transformative.
Thanks so much, Richard. Ian, finally on to you on this question of funding.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I agree with everything that's been said. My only other comment that I would add is, when we think about these areas that need long-term strategic investment, £40 million over 5 years is not going to solve the problem. It's definitely a step in the right direction. And if it's allocated and spent in the right way, in a strategic way, and the way that you just heard from others, can definitely have real impact. But the reality is to build novel capability, to bring new insight into an area. You're talking about building careers and researchers. We're talking about multi-year, 5, 10, 15, even 20-year investments, long-term investments, before we really start seeing those things feed through. So my only other comment would be, there needs to be longevity thinking about how we might address these issues going forward. It's not going to be fixed in 5 years.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for your time this afternoon. Chair, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Tonya, have you got some questions you want to come in on there?
Yeah, I've got some more. Thanks, Catherine. So in 2018, the government working group on brain tumour research suggested that the main barrier to more research wasn't the lack of funding, and I know we've been just talking about this, but a lack of fundable research proposals. I just wanted to know off each one of you, is this still the case, and what can be done to resolve this? Go on, I'll start with Richard because he's nodding.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, it goes back to the sort of training analogy. It is true that the capacity is limited for good applications. That's not unique to the UK. It's a global issue. And that's because if you put this alongside the racehorses that experience deep, broad communities like breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer, even leukemias. There isn't a competition there. We have to see it in the context of how this has come about culturally. So basically, brain tumours are intrinsically bad diseases. They're relatively rare. That doesn't attract and hasn't attracted people to work on them. That leads to few breakthroughs. And so you get into this vicious cycle, which has happened for decades, and that needs to be broken. But to simply offer opportunities to a brain tumour community, which is small, has less skill sets within it, and is less developed, is inevitably going to fail. So you need to have disruptive investments, which need to be smart, of the kind I've suggested, where you invest in those areas where you really have disruptive science, world-class ongoing, that can partner in brain tumour research. But throwing money at a sort of poorly resourced, underfunded, limited capacity field, I think will have limited benefit, but it should have ring-fence investment in a smart way. So yes, there have been poor applications going forward, but it's not acceptable to sit back and go as an excuse, well, we can give you money, but I'm sorry, you're just no good at doing science. You know, there are good pockets of that around, but it's about holistically building capacity and the community generally. That's what the mission's focused on. I think we can do that as an opportunity to do it, and it is a global problem. It's not just one in the UK.
Okay, I'll go to Chris, because then I'll have more for Ian afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously I agree with what Richard says. I also think that perception is perhaps a little bit outdated as well. I think maybe historically that was true. I think when I started in this field, there were really no samples available. There were no studies done on human tissue for many of these rare tumours. There were no model systems. We didn't know anything about the biology of these tumours. And so we were really, researchers then putting in applications, really we're just trying to extrapolate from the adult situation as we described before, or taking shots in the dark. That's simply not true anymore. I think we know an enormous amount about all kinds of different brain tumours, particularly childhood brain tumours, about their complexity, but also we have real, very clear research hypotheses to follow up now. And I think saying that there are no good applications is really, it's a bit circular, with the money being there to attract the highest quality, highest caliber applications in the first place. But by connecting the disease biologists with the specialists in these other more fundamental areas of biology that we've discovered are important in these brain tumours, is where we're going to get these high quality applications. And as Richard has said, that's out there in the UK and it's out there worldwide. And I think really the situation has changed dramatically even in the last 5 years.
Thanks, Chris. Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel that I have a huge amount to add to that. I would agree with both what Chris and Richard have said. I mean, I think, you know, the only other example I can think where this is, for CR UK, from our perspective, where we've looked in the similar kind of way, is when we thought about specifically in the pediatric cancer setting, where, you know, it's very similar to brain more generically, in that it's, you know, a relatively low incidence disease, lots of different rare diseases, a small kind of compact community. But to really kind of drive those innovations, we've put, you know, a sequence of innovation funding, which is really designed and proactively designed to encourage researchers from the developmental biology field to come and apply their wares with the pediatricians, with the pediatric doctors, with the pediatric researchers, and bring just that differential thinking. And again, we've got huge depth and breadth in terms of developmental biology within the UK, that we need to try and turn their attentions to the pediatric cancer question. At a fundamental biology question level, they're very similar themes. You know, they're asking about the fundamentals of how cells develop and the mechanisms within cancer, where they go wrong or where they're not controlled or where they don't stop. So fundamentally, there's just a huge opportunity for us, I think, to really tap into the broader kind of expertise across the UK, whether it be for brain cancer research or for pediatric research as well.
And Sue, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that the approach that the Tessa Jail Brain Cancer Mission has taken with their centres is more of a mentoring, so that there might have only been 9 centres accepted this time round, but, you know, they're helping the other 11 to get up to that standard. And, you know, I would just wonder if there could be a better mentoring approach to brain tumour scientists. You know, I was at the brain proposal guidance meeting this morning with the NCRI, and it occurred to me there, you know, who are on the panels of the NIHR and can in helping people bring forward good applications and helping them to make their applications better. So, you know, I think there should be some mentoring across the piece.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. I don't know if my connection's going a bit wobbly or it's yours, Sue. I'm not sure. I mean, Ian, I'm coming back to you. I mean, it was interesting today to see that the government have announced £20 million for medical research charities as part of the BEIS R&D budget allocations. But the government have said that the one reason why it hasn't been able to spend more on brain tumour research is the limited research workforce and the lack of basic science in this area. I mean, this isn't tallying with what Chris has been saying and Richard, what's going on recently, or does it? What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are probably a couple of different things in there. So, you know, in the first respect, I think important just to acknowledge that within the UK, we have quite a unique environment in terms of how medical research charities contribute to the research environment within the country. It's very different to many other European countries and indeed the US. We have a vibrant research community, and from a CRUK perspective, you know, overall we fund something like 50% of the non-commercial cancer research in the UK, which is very, you know, positive. But I think there is a consequence to that, and we've seen the impact of COVID to the various sectors, but specifically to medical research charities, where we haven't been able to do our fundraising events. Many of the retail chains for us have been closed for much of the year. It's had a massive impact in terms of our ability to fundraise, and because the system is somewhat reliant on the medical research sector, the knock-on effect of that is that, you know, funding into that system will decrease. And for us, since the start of the pandemic, that means that we've funded about £121 million less than we would have done against our pre-COVID plan. It means that our income for last year was about £100 million less than we had planned pre-COVID. So again, some really kind of significant impact for us and for the broader sector. So I think, you know, whilst the 20 million's welcome, it's clearly not going to fix that problem at a system level. And you know, I think and I hope that that's the first of many conversations that we'll be able to have with government about continued support for the sector, which ultimately means continued support for our research community and our research environment. I mean, my sense of again, I've not quite heard it phrased in the way that you did. I think that there just isn't research capacity in the system. I think we've talked about some of the complexity here. You know, if we really want to address this problem, it's about finding the right expertise, but it's also about thinking innovatively about how we bring people from other areas, other multidisciplinary teams, whether it's neurodevelopmental biology, whether it's immunologists, you know, whatever it might be, how we bring those people to bear for the question that we're trying to address, and then how we think about long-term strategic investment, which is about training, which is about capability and capacity build, and to, you know, to Richard's previous points about how we really drive an innovative next step. So I think if we just have a call and say we've made so many available and we'll see what happens, you know, my sense is that is not going to be sufficient to fix the problem. It's a good start, but, you know, we have to think longer term. We have to think strategically about where we can invest money in the right way.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, Ian, because, you know, it is complex. It's not just one area. It's not something you can just throw money at. We know that. But, you know, the initiatives we've been discussing that are affecting researchers' perceptions of the opportunities for funding and career progression in brain tumour research. So are you able to say that we're getting these people, we're, you know, sparking their interest, the people working in neurology? Is this all coming together? Because, you know, listening to what Chris and Richard have been saying, that is something that is moving forward. But what can we do to move it forward quicker and get more people involved?
Yeah, well, again, I don't think I can speak for government funding and for the broader system. You know, I can speak from a CRUK perspective, which again is just our perspective. It's, you know, it's not necessarily reflective, but again, if we take the Pediatric Innovation Awards, where in order to drive that multidisciplinarity, you know, we've proactively engaged with different scientific communities that wouldn't routinely come to CRUK. So we've had to go and partner. We've worked in collaboration with other organisations to go and engage with different communities and be proactive in bringing people to bear. So, you know, I think we've still got some way to go. If I'm honest, at a system level, it doesn't feel like we're quite there yet. And you know, I would encourage you perhaps to ask a similar question to Chris and Richard, because I think they'll probably be closer to it than I am.
And that was where I was going next. So if Chris, then Richard and Sue want to make a contribution, thanks.
Sure, I think we've touched upon it before, but I mean, we do need to grow the brain tumour research workforce as well. And I think we do need funding at all levels of that career pathway. I think it's been highlighted many times that many researchers don't view a viable career pathway to exist in brain tumour research in the UK, particularly around paediatric brain tumours. So we are losing people. I think we need to address that. We need to do the training in the first place, but we need to provide funding schemes, mechanisms to have our trained researchers stay in the UK, move between labs, getting the expertise that they need, and believing that, you know, the most successful of them will be able to form a long-term career in this area, whether they've come from another research environment first, whether we're training them up directly from university. And I think that is what's lacking. And I think we do need, in a long-term strategy, to do that, to provide the sort of high-level, thriving research community that will then allow us to also attract the world's leading scientists to come to the UK to set up their labs here as well.
Chris, who should be driving that forward then?
Good question. I guess it has to come from all the stakeholders, right? I mean, we are identifying people within all of our own labs, through all of our collaborative networks, seeing the kind of people who we'd like to retain in brain cancer research. So I think working in partnership with the funders to see how we can actually put the money into sort of the small short-term fellowships with the institutes to create faculty positions where there'll be a renewed focus on brain tumours and childhood cancers, and it needs to go hand in hand, I guess.
Okay, thanks. Richard?
Yeah, I think if the question was what could government do, I think, you know, government's empowered to change policy, to direct efforts and to bring funding into certain areas. I think maybe that's naive, but I think that's what I think it does. But I think often money isn't, the availability of money, my experience here, has not always been the problem. It's policies or systems in place which prevent flexible investment. So when you've got an area like brain tumours, which is rare, it is a niche area, if you like, in healthcare, there are limited individuals available, so the capacity in the system is small. Then when you put that alongside the existing policies which govern research funding and how that's directed, it doesn't fit, so it falls away. I think there needs to be some transformative thinking where you say, look, there's money available here. This is a system facing capacity issues. It needs to be built up, but there are pockets of excellence. How can we just take some of that money and flexibly invest it, even if it's associated with a bit of risk, which is minimized by putting in centers like neuroscience, etc., where it really is world-class excellence and proven track record. But it's sometimes the sort of turgid nature of the system which stops that money flowing, and it's rather rigid system by which it can't go into brain tumors because of this reason or that reason, if that makes sense. So there's more flexibility and more sort of innovative thinking with UKRI and other funders to direct some money, even in a short term, into brain tumours to get that pump priming going. I think that would be very helpful.
Well, you practically answered my next question anyway, so Sue?
Yeah, I obviously agree with what everybody said, and you know, our call was to, you know, to ring fence a pot of 105 million, and then let, you know, rather than go the other way around, what do we need to do? But here is the money, how can we best spend it? You know, using the brains around the table. And I think, you know, you may remember or recall that even the Prime Minister himself, in answering Chris Bryant's question on brain injury, you know, he said spontaneously that brain cancer is an area that is too often neglected in our system and may fall through the cracks. So even the Prime Minister is recognising that. And I think, you know, if we could make money available and the brains then decide how best to spend it for the best effort, then that's where we need to be.
Thanks, Sue. Ian, as a charity, you've been very vocal about the impact of COVID-19 on your income, and I know you have spoken about it in the previous questions. You know, the impact it's had on your income and future research budgets. What's it going to mean for future research? And basically, do you think that the government has supported you enough throughout the pandemic? And you're on mute.
Sorry, on mute. Yeah, thank you for that. So again, I guess just to reiterate, because I think the numbers are big and it's important that we get a sense. But from a CR UK perspective, we've got some new numbers which I have to say are not yet audited. So these are, you know, my caveat is subject to change. But our current kind of best estimates and forecast is that for us, we're going to be around £250 million behind where we were pre-COVID plan. over a 3-year window. So that's a significant kind of decline in our income. And as I said, since we started COVID, we've taken £121 million out of what we would have spent in research otherwise. So clearly these are big numbers, and the impact is going to be mid to long term. These are difficult numbers to kind of bounce back from. What I would say, and what came up I think to earlier, we will do our very best to honour the commitments that we've already made. We think we've now taken the cuts out of the live grants that we need to do. We've re-established our new baseline, and we're moving ahead in that light. So important just to acknowledge that. I mean, I think has government done enough to support the sector? Well, look, I think if you'll see the messaging from the AMRC campaign, which was very clearly, trying to articulate the scale of impact and the scale of reduction across the system. And you'll forgive me, Sue might know the numbers, but I think it was around 300 million in a year that they were looking at in terms of the shortfall, which will come directly out of the research community. And the announcement today was £20 million. So you can see there's a differential there. But again, I think it's important to recognise that it is a complex system. There's lots of interdependencies here, and again, everyone has a part to play in this system and how we kind of move things forward. So I don't want to be overly critical. I think all support to the sector is welcome, but clearly, if we want to mitigate the impact of COVID on the research community more broadly, we would hope that that's the first of a number of conversations that we'll be able to have with government over coming weeks, months, and years, I suspect.
Okay, so just one last question, because I know we need to move on to Richard and Chris. How important has voluntary sector funding been in supporting your research? I'll go first to Chris. Oh, Richard, go on.
I think it's been invaluable, absolutely invaluable. So if you're referring to sort of charity funding, CRUK, brain tumour research and brain tumour charity, I think they've been the backbone of funding for brain tumour research, particularly in paediatrics. That's actually true in the US as well, where I was before. Much of the funding comes through the voluntary sector because the other cancers swamp the budgets when it comes to sort of government and federal funding. So, and I think if you look back, Chris has referred to the fact that children's brain tumours have made remarkable strides, and we have in the last 20, 30 years in understanding these diseases. We've transformed them between a few labs in the world. I think if you look at the proportion in those labs that comes from foundation funding, it's massive, actually. It's at least half, if not more, that's come from foundation funding. But that's not a reason to not get funding from government. The answer to that would be, look what much more could be done if more money was provided from government, because what we've done with that modest investment, I think, has been highly significant. So I think what could be done with a modest investment for government could be dramatically transformative, I think.
Thanks, Richard. Chris?
Yeah, just completely agree, of course. My lab currently is about 90% charitably funded. Most of that is probably from sort of the larger peer-reviewed bodies like CRUK, Brain Tumour Charity, but a substantial proportion, maybe 20–25%, is from these very small foundations, giving me small or sometimes rather large amounts of money directly. These are very small parent-led charities usually, who've lost a child due to one of these terrible diseases, and I want to do something to catalyze the research. And that's a really important point. It's not just about funding as well. They really have catalyzed the whole research endeavor going back 5, 10, 15 years, as Richard knows. And certainly in the early days of my lab and DIPG research, it was really these small foundations that got researchers together, gave some modest funds to get us going, and demanded that we work together and start tackling this disease. So it shows really that the impact that these charitable sources can have, both in terms of advocacy, in terms of really driving the research agenda, as well as funding. And now really it seems like that's something that government could do much more effectively at the current time.
Thank you, Chris. Back to you, Kat.
Thank you. We're running out of time now, because it's important that we do put some of this to the government as well to get their response. But just before I say goodbye to you, our panel, I just wanted to ask about international collaboration, because you've talked a lot during this, and it's very obvious that that working in a collaborative way internationally is hugely important for this area of research, as it is for much medical research. And, you know, from my own visits to cancer research in Newcastle, I've seen how multinational the team is and how important that ease of being able to collaborate in that way, it is important for the work that they've achieved. Just what are there any concerns about our exit from the European Union at the moment in terms of its impact on your research? And if so, what can we do to try and mitigate that? But also, I know that cancer is one of the 5 missions identified in the EU's New Horizon Europe programme in 2027. So it'd just be interesting to hear your views on where you see the opportunities are, in particular for brain tumour and childhood cancer research as part of that. So would anyone like to respond on that? No? Apologies for bringing the tone down and talking about Brexit. Ian.
Yeah, I'm happy to start us off, and I think firstly, just to agree with you, I think you know, international collaboration is important across all parts of life sciences. You know, we've seen some great partnerships across Europe, but also across between the UK and the US, and actually a specific initiative between CRUK and the NCI around our cancer grand challenges, which is looking to solve some of the biggest kind of international cancer problems through a challenge-based approach. But specifically on this area, then there's almost a kind of an even greater importance in terms of international working for what are essentially rare cancers. And the reality is, if you're thinking about this at the clinical trial end, we simply don't have sufficient numbers of patients, which is clearly a good thing. But in terms of how you demonstrate real impact through clinical research, we don't have sufficient patients within country who can participate in those trials. So the vast majority of our paediatric trials are indeed international and work across Europe. So at the minute that seems to be working fine, but you know, there are some key moments coming up in terms of Brexit in particular. You know, thinking about the upcoming EU clinical trial regulations, which we won't be part of as the UK, and clearly we'll have our own view on what the UK regulations will look like going forward, but that'll be really critical to make sure that you know, we don't diverge and you know, make things more difficult in terms of international clinical research. There are other things around the clinical trial information system, which is a new EU portal around improving how quickly trials are set up and started across Europe. And again, the UK won't be part of that. So we either have to have a parallel system, and again, there's something there about if that diverges from that system, it creates additional challenges. And then finally, I guess in terms of Brexit, you know, there's this ongoing issue around data adequacy and the flow of information, which from a clinical trial perspective, again, if those things don't align, if we don't get that right, would have a really kind of direct and damaging impact on our ability to contribute to international clinical trials across Europe and the UK. Now, again, we think that's all progressing quite positively in the right direction, but they do represent real risks, and we absolutely need to keep a really close eye on those things. Finally, and then I'll pass to others if you wish, on Horizon 2020, then again, I think we were, as the rest of the community, really pleased to see government support for that, but recognising that that's a one-year settlement. And again, I think there still remains significant uncertainty about the future sustainability of that interaction with Horizon 2020. And, you know, fundamentally, I think that would be the crux behind your question of what are the opportunities versus, you know, if we don't resolve that longer-term engagement across European funding, then there are clearly some constraints that would be a concern for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Unless anyone's got anything to add, I think that was a fairly comprehensive response on all of that. I will say thank you so much to all of you, our panel members. We really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us today, because we appreciate how important your work is. And obviously it's been vital to get your input into this today. So thank you so much. And I'll now invite our next panel, and we'll put some of these issues directly to ministers and officials from the Department for Health and Social Care. Thank you. So yes, hello, hi. We have you. Would you like to just quickly introduce yourselves, just so that for the purposes of us being on Zoom, people can can understand who you are and where you work within this sphere. Shall I start with you, Minister?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. So I'm Lord Bethell. I'm the Minister for Life Sciences and for Innovation. I sit in the chair formerly occupied by the great Lord O'Shaughnessy, who is a great inspiration to this area, and I very much tread in his footsteps. In terms of life science research, that's very much in my bailiwick. And I've spoken about this issue in the House of Lords on numerous occasions, where everyone remembers very, very warmly Lady Jow, Tessa Jow's speech on her condition in the House of Lords, which is one of the most impactful interventions in recent memory.
Thank you, very much agree. And going in alphabetical order, shall I invite you to introduce yourself first, Mike?
Thank you. So I'm Mike Batley from the Department of Health and Social Care, where I'm Deputy Director for NIHR Research Programmes.
Great, thank you. And Helen?
I'm Helen Campbell. I work within the Department of Health and Social Care with Mike, and I lead day-to-day on cancer research.
Great, thank you. And thanks all of you for being here today as well. Tonya, do you want to kick off the questioning?
Yeah, thanks very much, Catherine. Okay, my question's initially to Lord Bethell. The written evidence that you helpfully provided for this session states that the government, or of the government's 5-year, £40 million commitment to brain tumour research in 2018, only 8.8 million has so far been allocated by the NIHR for dedicated brain tumour research. I was wondering if you could take this opportunity to update us on progress in meeting the overall £40 million commitment and provide us with any assessment of the impact that spending is having to date.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, you're absolutely right that the update I provide is accurate. And Professor Gilbertson, I think, spoke very clearly and presented a challenge, but also a fair representation of the situation we're in. We have put together a big financial package for late stage research. But where there is a challenge is that the early stage research and the bringing together of various different specialisms, oncology and neuroscience in particular, to create the spark and the basic science necessary to do further translational work, needs more resources and more support. And so that's why at the moment we are focused very much on the earlier stage of the pipeline. I'm not sure if it's helpful to think in terms of a target or of an objective of trying to spend that 40 million as quickly as humanly possible, when in fact the science doesn't necessarily exist to do the translational work that that money is targeted at. So instead, we need to focus on the early stage and the workshops that the Tessa Jow Foundation are bringing together and that we're contributing to are exactly the right approach for trying to make that magic happen. And maybe I could, if you don't mind, defer to Mike or Helen to just explain a little bit more in technical detail about how we're trying to get those different research organizations aligned to deliver the kind of progress that you're looking for.
Okay, Mike, do you want to come in there?
I can, yes. So, and just to clarify the £8.8 million, so this is research that's funded through NIHR programs and academy. There's also a significant amount of NIHR support for research that's put through NIHR infrastructure. And that's where we're supporting research across the NHS that's funded both by government, also by charities, very importantly, and by commercial entities. And so we know that there'll be a lot of work going on within NIHR infrastructure, within NIHR hospitals that's supporting others' research that won't have been included in these figures, but will definitely have been spent on brain tumours. So the figures we've given, exactly as Lord Bethell says, are precise, but to some extent they are sort of lower end estimates of what's actually been spent. further to Lord Bethel's point, yes, as you've heard repeatedly today, the NIHR is there to translate basic discoveries, new discoveries in science, into treatment through our translational, our clinical and our applied research. And that very much depends on this earlier end of the pipeline, these new discoveries, this new basic science on that can then be translated into treatments. And so far, I think it was recognised in the Task and Finish Group report that was published around 3 years ago. So the brain tumour research was involved in around the time of the setup of the Tessagel mission. That is this gap in, or this lack of new basic science discoveries is causing a bit of a blockage in that pipeline, which means there isn't as much there that we can fund from NIHR's perspective in terms of turning things into actual treatments. And so this is where we've been working with UKRI, so UK Research and Innovation, who do fund research in that basic science space. They've agreed so far to hold a SAMPIS event that will bring together neuroscientists with oncologists to again see if we can spark more ideas, spark new approaches, spark new things that will actually grow the basic science space in this area. And we also understand they are funding quite a few PhDs and doing a fair amount of capacity building in this space. And we would like to see what more we can do with them to really expand that work.
I'll carry on questioning you then, Mike, just for a minute, because, you know, listening to Professor Chris Jones earlier, you know, that spark, that innovation, it is there across the world. And I did ask him, you know, who do they think should be leading on this? Because I think it needs driving forward, and that's what's come through to us, you know, as a committee, that this needs to be led and taken forward. Where does that responsibility lie? I mean, to me, it would be the government. Have you got that ambition?
Certainly, from a funding perspective, that would fall to UKRI. So it's outside of NIHR's immediate ambit of control. And so it's colleagues in UKRI and particularly in BAYS who will hold the ring on that work.
And is it possible for the government to be more flexible with its investment? Because that's what it was spoken about, that it isn't flexible with this investment, and as a result, the strides aren't really being made.
So I'm not sure if Lord Bethel wants to come back in. I see you've come up.
Well, Mike, do you want to address the flexibility question? And then if you don't mind, I'll come in and just build on your point.
Okay.
So there's flexibility of investment. I suppose there's flexibility of investment in terms of across different funders. So it's whether UKRI wishes to put more into this space or do more different things in this space is in some respects the decision of UKRI. Certainly from NIHR perspective, this is where we've been working really closely with the Tessagel Brain Cancer Mission, because we completely agree with Professor Gilbert, so that, you know, sort of the money's there. So we've said the money's there in the translational, clinical and applied space. What we really need is a growing research community to actually take advantage of that as well. And again, this is where we've been working with the mission on, for example, workshops, so that researchers who've applied for our funding and haven't been successful have that support, don't get discouraged, keep on hopefully applying more, improving what's coming into us so that we can then fund more research in the future. And also the funding that we're putting into the research aspects of the Tessagel Brain Cancer Mission research fellows in neuro-oncology, where again we think will help address this need that will grow the research community. So from the NIHR, we're actually coming at this from a number of different perspectives, because we recognise that there are a number of different challenges and blockers in place that need to be overcome. And again, we're also keen to, we've been working with colleagues in UKRI to see what can be done more in the basic science space in that similarly more sort of broader, flexible way.
Okay, and then Lord Bethel, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, and just, I mean, I think you know this, but just to flag, I mean, the success of the British life sciences business is that it's a combination of three components. There is government and the NHS, but there is also academia, and there is also the private sector, which in this case is represented by philanthropy, by research charities. And it's those three pieces working together that means we make success. And each one has a different piece to bring. Academia is really where the research is going to come from, and government is there for funding, and the charities are there for championship and leadership. And so, to be direct, government on its own can't find the cure for diseases. That's not what we can do on our own. What we can try to do is to provide funding in the right places, and to sponsor thoughtful and promising research. And what Mike was alluding to there is this frustrating but unavoidable truth, which is that it is clearer and easier to fund translational work. That is a lower risk and clearer way of project management exercise, whereas funding the science is a very unpredictable affair, and we can't guarantee that the environment of early stage scientific funding is going to throw up exactly what we need for specific conditions like brain cancer. But what we can try to do is to be catalytic and to bring together the correct kinds of people, which hasn't happened enough in this area. And Professor Gilbertson spoke, I thought, interestingly, about the failure in the UK of oncologists and neuroscientists to somehow get on with each other. There's a sort of Mars and Venus problem. And that's why I think that this route that we are going down is the right one, and why we are keen to continue to sponsor it.
I just want to go back to another question I've got for you, Lord Bethel. You have indicated that spending on research infrastructure isn't included in this £8.8 million figure. Can you confirm whether the government considers spending on research infrastructure to be part of the overall £40 million commitment? And will it be included when you calculate whether the £40 million ambition has been met?
Tony, if you don't mind, I'm going to knock that one to Mike, because that's quite technical. Thank you.
Okay.
So yes, so there's this spending on infrastructure is fundamental to brain tumour research happening across the NHS. And as I say, this infrastructure spend, it absolutely supports a lot of the work done by charities and funded by charities, for example, and the studies that they're running in the NHS. So it is a really important part of the brain tumour funding landscape. The challenge we have is how to actually unpick exactly how much of that is being spent on brain tumour research versus other types of cancer and other types of work. So, for example, and again, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of this. So, for example, it may be that our infrastructure is mostly people. So we're funding people working across the system who are likely to be working on a range of different studies at any one time. And so a large number of people will be clinical research nurses who we know are working in cancer, and we know are working across a range of different cancer studies on wards, different patients, different studies. But to actually unpick their time, for example, exactly how much of their time they're spending on, say, a brain tumour study versus another type of study, this really starts to put quite a big administrative burden on frontline staff. And so we're having to strike that balance between we'd like to know this information, but the sort of burden that it would put on people for us to actually collect that information. And one final point, again, so I don't want to sound too technical, but a number of studies are likely to be relevant to a number of different cancers. And so there's questions of how we unpick that. So it's really not, we'd like that information, but it's really not straightforward to try and generally unpick that in a useful way, in a suitably unburdensome way on the system.
Is there an attempt to unpick that information and to know, to be able to specify what the infrastructure spending is, because surely there should be some idea, even if it's guesstimates, I should imagine, of where this funding is going. Or are you just saying, well, that's too burdensome, we can't put that on our staff, on our NHS staff?
So it's a question of how sort of acceptable a guesstimate would be, because it would very much be a guesstimate for this. So it's certainly something we could look to do. But as I say, it would be. I'm sort of slightly uncomfortable potentially putting out what might be misleading figures, if we're having to guess some of this stuff. So it's genuinely things. Sorry.
If I can come in with a slightly lay person's sort of perspective here, and forgive me if this sounds sort of too rudimentary, but when we're talking about the early stage science, we've got scientists in labs around the country tinkering with the brain and prodding bits of cancer. And who knows what they turn up with? They may turn up with something that has got to do with brain cancer, or it might do with eye ophthalmology, or it might turn up with autism. I mean, you don't quite know what insight might emerge from their research and which field of discovery their work might contribute to. And that serendipity, that uncertainty, is both unbelievably frustrating and drives all of us nuts. And I wouldn't want to be a research administrator for all the tea in China, but it is part of the magic and the mystery of scientific discovery and endeavor. And it's really frustrating, because this is what we're depending upon in order to make advances on something is a knotty problem like child cancer, brain cancer. But it isn't a lack of aptitude or seriousness that we can't account for this financially.
But it is about accountability and where that money is going.
I'm afraid it just doesn't lend itself very easily to the spreadsheet or to the P&L.
Sorry, do you
right?
mind,
yes, Kat.
Come in there, Tonya, because I know these are your questions, but I just wanted to clarify. Did you say that the research infrastructure spending will come out of the £40 million commitment? Did you say yes to that? Sorry, Mike, I think it was you that answered that question.
I think the spend on infrastructure is very relevant. So it's part of the overall NIHR spend.
So it will come out of the £40 million spend, but then you went on to say that you're not able to specify how much may have been spent on infrastructure spending. Is that a fair reflection of what you've said?
So we'd like to spend more than the £40 million. Just to be clear, there isn't a specific pot of money that we'll say, well, we will just spend this much on brain tumour research. If we could spend more than that, we'd very happily spend more than that.
So it's a minimum 40 million. So you will spend, but out of that 40 million, will that infrastructure spend be included within that 40 million?
So in terms of working, so that it's not that we have sort of this ring fence pot, and if money that's somehow limiting what we are spending on brain tumour research. So for example, if we're spending a lot more in infrastructure on brain tumour research, that won't mean that we'll then spend less on brain tumour research elsewhere. So we really want to maximise our spending right across the system. So I'm not sure what.
Yeah, can you understand the concerns that may flow from that lack of accountability and transparency potentially, and absolutely taking on board the point Lord Bethel made about serendipitous findings as part of generic cancer research or cancer research into other, and obviously all research is good research, there's absolutely no doubt about that, and all money spent on research for cancer is welcome. However, the issue that we're looking at today is a chronic, long-standing underfunding specifically of brain tumour cancer research and the impact particularly on children as well. And so there is a huge interest in being sure that the funding that has been promised after such a long time for this area of research is actually going on this area of research. And I would have thought that any helpful cross results that may come out of research that could benefit brain research and other cancer research would be in addition to that core funding that has been promised to this particular research. And obviously only £8.8 million so far has been allocated. So I think there is some concern to know that it will all be allocated, that there will be sufficient support given to ensure it's allocated, and that it doesn't go on some infrastructure spending, which I'm sure is very valuable, but doesn't appear to be very transparently attributable to supporting specifically brain tumour research. So I don't know if you want to respond to that, Lord Bethel.
I was going to turn to Mike in the first instance, but I was going to, yeah, thank you.
So all of the fundable proposals we've received for brain tumour research, we have funded. And from an infrastructure perspective, again, the brain tumour research, all the brain tumour research that we can support is being supported. And so the £40 million isn't sort of providing either some kind of break on what we're doing. So it's not as if we're saying we're only going to spend so much on this. But to some extent, where our limit is, it's not in the pot or spending the £40 million on this or that. Our limit is, as you've heard, it's the basic science, it's the ideas, fundable ideas coming to us that we can put research into. It's the size of the research community. And so that's where we're focusing our efforts, because that's what's needed to really boost the volume capacity of brain tumour research in this country.
And is that what you believe will be supported by the infrastructure spending? Is the infrastructure spending aimed at building the capacity within the research community and the research funding bidding capacity as well?
So the infrastructure spending that we have, so for example, a lot of the research you've heard that's being funded by research charities, arguably it wouldn't be able to happen if it wasn't for that infrastructure spend. So we provide that infrastructure that allows others to run their research programs, their research studies in the NHS. And so it's very much there to support a range of activities in the brain tumour research space.
Sorry, go on, Tonya, you can carry on.
Yeah, no, I'll try and move the conversation on. Just to Lord Bethel then, your written evidence also stated that of the 69 applications for brain tumour research funding the NIHR had received since April 2018, just 10 have been approved. And while this funding is welcome, and we've spoken about, where it goes and how we track it, doesn't this high injection rate miss the whole point of the £40 million commitment, which should be to dramatically increase funding for brain tumour research?
Well, Daniel, I can see why you're asking that, but I think that what we're trying to explain, and maybe we're not doing it very well, is exactly the point that Professor Gilbertson was trying to make. Is that the problem here is not, I promise you, it's not that there is a big pot of money and we are resistant to spending it. It is, I promise you, it's not that there's 40 million quid and for some reason we've taken it into our minds that we're going to sit on it for ages because we don't think it, for some reason we're trying not to spend it. That is not the case. In fact, we're desperate to spend it. We would love to spend it very much indeed. And for all the obvious reasons in government that you do want to spend it, we don't want it. The problem is that the projects that are coming forward by any reasonable standard don't meet the bar of a sufficient return on investment as they are currently coming in. And I don't think that's a particular, I'm the layperson and I'm just repeating the feedback that I'm getting, but I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement. I don't think that there is a lot of people saying that we are turning down really strong, well-evidenced proposals. Where there is a problem is that, as Professor Gilbertson said, the environment in the UK has not created a a good marriage between oncology and neuroscience. And the insight, the basic scientific insight that creates the germ of the idea that can then be translated into a therapy or a remedy is not quite there yet. And so what you have to do, and this is a not uncommon problem, there are a dozen, 24 areas of clinical research where patient groups and charities and advocates are unbelievably frustrated that there isn't greater progress because of a bottleneck at the very, very early stage. And it is more difficult to agitate for development and change with this kind of problem than in a translational problem. If it's a translational problem, you can throw money at it. You can say, right, there's 25 really great ideas. We're going to sponsor half of them, and one of them will throw up something good. That is a relatively straightforward problem. That's not the problem we have here, and that's why we're having to think through all of these slightly convoluted and complex solutions, which we hope will get us there in the end.
And on that point, Lord Bethel, sorry, Mike, but on that point, I felt really positive on the last panel that what Professor Chris was saying, and also Richard, that, you know, there is the opportunity here to work smarter. There's the opportunity here to not just throw money at something, but also to be innovative, to have those ideas. And yet we don't know where that money's going. I kind of not getting the feeling that we're joined up. And I've got a question for Helen in a minute, but I'll let Mike come in because he's indicated first. And I just feel that there's that is there a miscommunication here? Is that not gelling up? Because I felt that there was the opportunity for advancements and great strides to be made after listening to the last panel. And, you know, you're talking about the infancy of this research. Mike.
So if I could start on the question around the number of applications that have been successful in gaining funding. So we funded all of the applications that met the sort of the science quality bar, so the usual NIHR bars on these things. On those applications that weren't successful, we recognised that the researchers would have put an awful lot of work into getting those applications together. And we don't want to lose that research. You don't want to lose those people to the system because they didn't make it over the finish line on their first attempt. And that's why we're working with the Tessa Brain Cancer Mission, set up some workshops for those researchers who are unsuccessful to really help them understand why that might be, how they might improve their applications, and so that we can keep them engaged. And as I say, hopefully they will apply again, and hopefully they'll be able to get over the funding bar next time. So we're not just sort of giving up on people when they're not successful the first time around. We are working with the mission to really try and make the most of people's efforts, whether they're initially successful or not.
Now, I know that the chair wants to come in again, but I just want to take that over to Helen then. You know, you worked on the working party. Is there anything you'd like to add to what's been said?
I mean, obviously agree with everything that has been said. And I think I go back to what was said earlier, what Richard Gilbertson was saying. You know, if you put the ambition of being able to spend 40 million over 5 years, it is a bit of a blunt tool, but it's a good start. And bear in mind, the remit of the NIHR is clinical and applied health and social care research. So that's the part of the research pathway that we focus on. So the number of applications has increased substantially. More than double have been successful, and we've still got some being considered and going through the process. So that has made an impact, absolutely made. And of the projects we funded, they are really exciting. They're looking at things like how do we get better at speeding up the diagnosis of children with cancer and with brain cancer. They're looking at, do we really need to prescribe anti-epileptics before surgery? They're all things that really help people living with cancer and the NHS in treating them. On their own, they're unlikely to immediately lead to a cure for cancer, for childhood cancers and for brain cancer. That's why the partnership working across the whole spectrum is so important. and why the Tessa Brain Cancer Mission is such an incredible step forward, because it's a vehicle by which all the key players can get together, really undo what the problems are and how they might best be tackled, and what partner might best contribute to which part.
And it would be nice to know, though, Helen, that, you know, how much of that, and you've spoken about the research going on with child tumours, brain tumours, which is why we're here. You know, if you could identify how much of that money is going towards that research, that's what we want to know.
Yes, I mean, the technical difficulty is that for all of our, when is a piece of research relevant to children and when is it not? How long is a piece of string? And at this moment, data systems don't allow us to pull out participants in trials by age. We know things are underway to try and help that happen. What we can do is, of course, certain tumours happen only in childhood. Sadly, DIPG is one of them. So what we can attempt to look at it by searching on the terms of the diseases specific to childhood cancers, and that's how we approach that issue.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to the chair now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tonya. I'm going to bring Elliot in.
Thank you, Chair. Lord Bethell, if I can come to you yourself first. The government has stated that we want to see more high quality brain tumour research proposals being submitted. So what is being done to help encourage and achieve that outcome? Oh, you're muted. Sorry, Lord Bethell.
Oh yeah, thank you. No, you're absolutely right. That is very much our objective. But maybe I could pass on to Michael, Helen, just to talk about the specifics of how we're working with research charities and the private sector and academics to get these kinds of research projects over the line.
Mike.
I can maybe start. I don't know if Helen will want to come in. So initially, so it was the announcement of the £40 million 3 years ago sends that very strong signal to the community that this is an area to move into, this is an area worth moving into, there is funding here if you want to, and that hopefully encourages people in. But again, as you've heard, there are a number of other challenges here, particularly with the relatively small research communities that are out there. So we want to grow the overall research community in brain tumour research. And this is where we've been working with the Tessa mission on some of their fellowships for neuro-oncology. The initial call that we put out also included an NHR Academy. And so this is where people can apply for training and training awards and training grants. So again, we'd like to see more people with specific training on brain tumour research. And again, there's the in terms of getting more applications, it partly comes back to this issue of the bottleneck that we're seeing at the basic science side of things. So if we could get that increase more novel findings in the basic science space, then that would actually increase the number of applications that we could actually get into NIHR. So a whole different range of areas that are causing the bottlenecks and hurdles here, and we're working across those.
Thank you very much, Mike. And you've actually answered my next question as well, which was going to ask the steps you were going to take to tackle the issue of brain tumour research workforce and encourage it as a viable career option. So I appreciate we're getting to the end of the session. So Chair, I'll pass back to you so that we can carry on.
Thank you. Thanks, Elliot. I don't know if Tonya wants to come back in, or I'm happy to try and put to you, Lord Bethell, one of the issues about childhood cancer survival rates, that they are improving overall, but there are, as we've discussed and we've heard the evidence today, that some types of brain tumour like DIPG have very low survival rates. And what's not very clear is whether they are benefiting from the Tessa funding. Will the government develop a bespoke research strategy for childhood cancers with the worst survival rates?
Well, in some ways, I think what we're talking about here is a research pipeline that is dedicated to this, and we do take it very seriously. Brain cancers are particularly pernicious because of their location and because of the defenses of the brain that protect it from many interventions that would work elsewhere in the body. And the way in which they attack children is just absolutely heartbreaking. So we are very focused on it. And I pay tribute to the Tessa Jowell Foundation and to Lord O'Shaughnessy in particular for your evangelism and your advocacy on that. It's very much front of mind. But Mike, maybe I can pass to you about what could be described as specifically a childhood brain cancer track here, as opposed to our general funding of research proposals that have merit.
Yeah, I mean, it was just drawing on some of the comments you made earlier as well, where you referenced the sort of the challenge around funding programs and finding programs to fund. And you mentioned that many are not a good return on investment. And I think that is one of the big challenges that faces these very rare subtypes, is that often you can't apply the same criteria as you would to other research potentially. So I think one of the questions, because it's so difficult to attract charitable funding, this is where really campaigners and petitioners who we're here on behalf of today would really like to see the government step up to this and to dedicate additional funding specifically for this purpose. So, I mean, are you able to give any reassurance on that front today?
Well, I'm going to turn to Mike in a second, but I don't think it, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I certainly don't think it's wise for ministers who do not have clinical research qualifications to make decisions about what research applications should be funded and which shouldn't, on either personal bias, political, or any other grounds. There is a meritocracy to this. We've got to fund, surely, the applications that have got the best return for the general well-being of the nation. So there is, and we defer to our scientists to be able to make those assessments. And once you get, I mean, I don't know if this is what you were driving at, so forgive me if I'm sort of, but we really can't have politicians deciding what gets funded and what doesn't. I mean, that would be a very dangerous place to get to. And the CMO would have me off in no time at all if I tried to do that. That's not going to work. What we can do, though, and where I completely agree with you, and is that there are some conditions that have, you know, we have to proceed with humanity, and there are the system isn't perfect, and where there is advocacy and challenge around a particular condition, we have to it is right to listen to patient groups and to hear the arguments that they make about why there should be a particular effort made about a particular condition. But those efforts are often about trying to align academic research and to try and activate enthusiasm and interest and collaboration. Collaboration is absolutely key here, as Professor Gilbertson pointed out. Getting people working together and sparking off each other and sharing ideas. This isn't just a sort of nice to have. This is the fundamental ingredient of successful research. Now, if you have a pot of money that is earmarked for applications that cross a certain quality threshold, that demonstrates a degree of commitment to an area. But we can't lower the threshold for one condition over another because of a sentimental or political decision. That, I think, really would I'm not sure if that was what you were suggesting, but I just want to be clear that would be really undermining
there's nothing credibility. No, there's nothing sentimental in what I'm suggesting. It's just the nature of very rare diseases that require sometimes a different approach. And I've had this conversation about a number of rare diseases, not just the subject that we're discussing today. But I think, you know, we're running out of time, so that's a conversation for another day. But just to finish off, Lord Bethell, what plans does the government have then to focus on brain tumour research in the UK beyond what it's already committed to? Because I think the The petitioners today would like to have the reassurance that the government is focused on brain tumour research, and that we'd like to see the money that's been promised spent, and also a future for this research, and hope, really. And it's not a sentimental thing. It's a scientific challenge that we need to find a cure. We need to find the right treatments for these conditions, and that we need to give hope to the petitioners today that the government is committed to supporting those who experience these conditions, and those working in this field, very much trying to fight to find those treatments, that there is hope in the pipeline in the future as well.
Well, Catherine, you put it very well, and we share your commitment. I kind of slightly feel I've said my piece. Michael, Helen, is there anything that you would like to flag to answer Catherine's question about future plans that have previously not quite gone announced yet?
Shall I come in there?
Thank you, Helen.
I think truly and genuinely a major step forward is the Test-Agile Centres of Excellence. We have an absolute focus across the health service now to really help with specialising neuro-oncology in these key centres. I think it will be transformational in the service, and all credit to the mission for having done so. One of the beauties of it is that the community will be able to join up in the academy to choose the most important areas for research. What are the most important questions for treating adults and children with cancer, and how do we best, as a research community, corral ourselves to get proposals together and to put them in to the NIHR where appropriate, or to the Medical Research Council where appropriate, depending on the nature of the research question. So I genuinely think that will be transformational, and I'm looking forward to looking at the research proposals.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks very much. We're out of time today, but we do appreciate you spending this time with us. And thank you very much to all of our witnesses who we've heard from today. And I think there's plenty to focus on this in the future. So I'm sure we will be discussing this again. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
Order, order.